Parry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and may I also congratulate you on your election. Having just fought my first and only election, I know how arduous it can be, so I congratulate you on fighting a second one so soon after the first. It's also been a pleasure to listen to the maiden speeches from so many honourable members from all sides of the House today. And I envy the fact that so many people are post-Maiden when I still have this ordeal ahead. At least, unlike earlier today, I can speak to a hushed and listening House, although perhaps Hansard can show that's because there is quite a lot of green space on the benches opposite. I don't, by contrast, envy anybody their constituency, as I think I represent quite the nicest bit of this great country. The constituency of Devizes encompasses a very large chunk of central Wiltshire. We have the vibrant market towns of Devizes and Marlborough, Tidworth, Durrington and Ludgershall, the armed forces garrisons at Tidworth, Neveravon, Bulford, Larkhill and Upavon, 111 beautiful villages, the Neolithic monument of Avebury, miles of rolling chalk landscape and the tranquil Pewsey Vale. It is wonderful and I urge you all to visit as soon as possible. We host the Devizes to Westminster canoe race, which some might say is an easier way of getting here than fighting a general election. And we also are home to Wadworth breweries, brewers with pride of the famous 6X beer, which is why I'm such a fervent supporter of community pubs. And when the economic circumstances that we've inherited improve, I would like to see taxes on beer lowered. There are many useful lessons to be learned for budding politicians in the Devizes constituency, and I'll mention a couple. In the Devizes marketplace is a cross bearing the legend of Ruth Pearce, a market woman who was doing a bit of dodgy dealing in the marketplace and said, "God shall strike me down if I am found to be telling a lie." And she was struck down immediately, bearing the proof of that lie in her hand, which I think is a valuable lesson for politicians holding speeches. The need to create legislation that endures is also obvious in my constituency. The oldest piece of legislation never to be repealed was passed by the Parliament of 1267 that met in Marlborough. And I think, again, a lesson of passing legislation that stands the test of time. And the legendary Devizes Cane Hill Lock flight on the wonderful Kennet and Avon Canal, the longest in-water canal in the British Isles, I might add, shows us what local energy and activism can do, because it was the local business people of that town that paid for the canal to come up to the top of the hill where Devizes sits, when it would have been so much easier just to go around. And energy, activism and a refusal to go around are all things that my predecessor in this seat, Michael Ancram, demonstrated abundantly. When he was elected to represent Devizes in 1992, he was already a very experienced politician. First elected in 1974, in 1979 he beat a young Scottish Labour politician for the seat of Edinburgh South, one Gordon Brown. And it took David Cameron 31 years until he was able to emulate the feat of beating Gordon Brown in a general election. Michael's distinguished political career spanned many decades, almost 4 decades, and took in the roles of Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Shadow Foreign Secretary, Shadow Defence Secretary, and Chairman and Deputy Leader of the Conservative Party. And whilst in my wildest moments or in my cups I might aspire to follow in his political footsteps, it is his personal characteristics of unfailing courtesy, his dedicated work on behalf of his constituents, and a great love for the part of Wiltshire he represented that I would most like to emulate. It's indeed my great love for Wiltshire, my family's home for the last decade, that has brought me into politics. I live in a small Wiltshire village, and so I've seen firsthand the damage to rural Britain caused by the last government, possibly the most urban-minded government this country has ever seen. Our farmers have struggled with mountains of red tape, unchecked animal disease, and an indifferent government not interested in buying British food or dealing with a dishonest food labelling regime. We have had multiple grandiose regional spatial strategies in Wiltshire, but we still lack affordable housing, transport links and the broadband infrastructure that is so important for building a living and working countryside. And it's a shocking testament to, again, a legacy of the last government, that we have an NHS quangocracy that in my constituency means that we have the worst ambulance response times in the region and no minor injuries unit in the whole constituency. But it's the lacklustre state of the rural economy and embedded rural poverty that troubles me most. Employment in my constituency, that great driver out of poverty, is still weak, and unemployment has more than doubled in the last 5 years. And as the former government's own rural advisor said, there are huge traditional barriers to gaining employment in rural areas: poor public transport, less training and less guidance provision, which is a bit of New Labour gobbledygook that says we don't get as many job centres per head of the population in rural Britain. Poverty in rural Britain is really there and often well hidden behind the chocolate box facade. The pensioner who is too proud to claim benefits, the family travelling 40 or 50 miles on poorly maintained roads with high petrol prices to get to work, the unskilled labourer laid off when the nearest job is 40 miles away, or the single mother who came to see me in my surgery who is sleeping on her parents' sofa because she cannot get on the housing list. These are the issues that I think that we need to tackle, and I know from my constituency that they do not feel they were listened to by the last government. Well, with this government, they will not be overlooked. And no discussion of my constituency could be complete without me mentioning the armed forces. As my next-door neighbour, James Gray, likes to say, I am the MP for most of the British Army. Some small exaggeration, but that my constituency is home to over 11,000 soldiers, plus at least the same number of dependents, not to mention the several thousand MOD civil servants who also live there. And that's why I'm so proud to support our armed forces, and I know that all of the members across the House do so in most cases, and many of us on these benches will welcome the imminent strategic defence review and a government that is much more supportive of our current operational commitments. Now, I was not successful today in the private members' ballot, and what I wanted to bring in was the recognition of Remembrance Day as a national holiday, so that all generations can stand up and understand the sacrifices our armed forces have made and pay those respects to our past and serving troops. And I assure you will be hearing from me on that matter in the future, and I would welcome the support from all benches across the House to get that done. And in conclusion, I would like to say this. While the name of my constituency is derived from the Latin ad divisus, and I didn't learn that at Nailsea Comprehensive School, or on the boundaries, reflecting the town's historical position on the edge of two local manors, I want the people of the Devizes constituency to no longer feel that they are on the edge of policy making, or on the political boundaries, or forgotten by the government, but instead to know that their aims and aspirations are at the heart of our government's outlook going forward. It is my job to make that happen, and it's a job that I am proud to do.